Most importantly, the yogic direct perceiver that realizes emptiness directly. Because what does it do? It is exactly opposite to the mind that perceives inherent existence. In order to overcome the root, what is the root of our problems? The mind that perceives inherent existence. The only mind that can realistically overcome that is a mind that directly perceives the opposite. But it's fueled by renunciation, the wish to be free from cyclic existence. That's what it fuels, and therefore the fuel only takes you here. Whereas the Mahayana path, what is the fuel here? The wish to free all sentient beings. It's the same, it's a cable car, it's the same mind that realizes emptiness directly, but this time, this mind shoots up. It goes stronger. It doesn't just go here, it goes all the way to enlightenment. So, with this one here, you go all the way here, and that's it. You get off.
It's not a stage on the way?
Until you get another cable car.
You can't change.
You take this one. You need to walk over and take this one. Okay? So then do the Mahayana practices and get to enlightenment. Actually, it's not so much of a problem. Why don't we all go here first? Why don't we go and become self-liberated first? And then go, because eventually we go anyway. We just need to catch the other cable car. We just need to apply the practices, and then we go very quickly. The problem is we take a long rest here. We stay a long time. That's where we wanted to go. That's where we're going to stay for a while. So basically the mind is such that we want, if someone, this should not be underestimated, someone who really wants to be self-liberated, that person is so special. The determination to get there. Honestly, I am so terribly attached to my samsara. I'm very attached. I'm not attached to my suffering of suffering. I'm attached to my suffering of change. In other words, I'm very attached to my happiness. Right? That's why I don't want to go. I don't want to go there. I don't want to leave behind my happiness.
But the enlightenment point, which is a point probably.
A stage, a mental stage.
Even in your drawing is like a pyramid.
Okay, never mind the drawing. It's just a drawing.
Sorry, okay, no, the drawing.
It's just an example.
Metaphor, okay.
It's just a metaphor, so pointed, not pointed, flat.
The higher you go, the purer or the lonelier you become, or not?
Oh no! Oh my God, no! Loneliness.
Sorry for my.
No. Okay, please. We need to understand that analogies are limited. We shouldn't take everything. Oh my God, it's going to be really cold up there because it's up on the mountain, right? It's not. That's not. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't go all the way. I'm just using it. Just use the similarity and forget the rest. The cold, the loneliness. Not everyone goes there, but it's not loneliness.
Literally, how many people are enlightened?
How many people are enlightened? We don't know, right?
Very
For all I know, you could be. You could be a Buddha. You could all be enlightened. You're just here for my sake, to teach me, or to accumulate enough merit.
Unfortunately, most of us are not.
Well, that's what every Buddha would say, so... Right? I don't know. Any of you could be enlightened. I know I'm not, but we only know of ourselves, basically. So I don't know how many are enlightened. Pardon?
You said you know that you're not. I said all Buddhas would say it.
Right, that's your perception. Sure. But anyway, basically, I guess it's important to understand we just don't know. Okay? But the point is, this is possible. From a Buddhist perspective, it is possible to overcome the gravity, if you like, or to overcome the afflictive obstructions because they're not in the nature of our mind. They're just temporary. They seem very natural. But just because it seems natural as in this life and over many, many lifetimes, it doesn't mean it's really the nature of our mind. So we can overcome it. But there's two vehicles that take us there.
What is the gravity of the Mahayana?
The Mahayana is the cognitive obstructions. Called the cognitive obstructions. The other ones are called afflictive obstructions. They're called cognitive obstructions because cognitive in the sense that they keep us from cognizing all phenomena. Because what is the difference between someone who reaches this stage and this stage? It means this person still has, like someone who hasn't reached this stage, still has ignorance, anger, and so forth. And once they reach this stage, they've overcome these afflictive obstructions. That is to say, anger, arrogance, and so forth. They've overcome this, and so they're free from this. And there's no suffering anymore. But there's still a limitation. They still haven't reached this level yet because they haven't just overcome, they have only overcome the afflictive obstructions. But the mind, the mental consciousness that we have right now, because it's in the nature of being clear and knowing, it actually can know anything. Sometimes the example is given of our mind is like a clear crystal. Anything can be reflected in this crystal. Anything can be known, but there's some temporary dirt on top of the crystal. So the coarsest dirt is like the afflictive obstructions. But once we get rid of them, there's still some smear. There's still some inability to cognize all phenomena. And these are the cognitive obstructions, the obstructions to realize all phenomena. And why do you want to realize them? Because to be a Buddha, to be like a Buddha, is the perfect state to be of benefit to others. Because if I know exactly each and every one of your minds, if I know your mind, I know exactly your karma, the actions you've accumulated in the past, what you will experience, and I have, of course, the Buddha having incredible compassion and just care for others. Perfect! Because the Buddha cannot take our problems and difficulties, but can show us exactly what to do. Right? So Buddha would be able to guide us to get there ourselves in the best way. That's why to be free from the cognitive obstructions, that is the goal. But the reason I'm showing this here, I mean, I'm going off into a lot of detailed explanation, and it's not so much part of this course, but to get an understanding that actually they start in the same way. The realization of emptiness is the same for both. That's why when you do the reading, I described the Hinayana path and the Bodhisattva path, and I used exactly the same words. I didn't even change the wording. To point this out, the path, what is the path? It's like different stages on the way. 4 of them, right? I mean, wherever you want to put them, but there's 4 stages: path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, and path of meditation. These are the 4 stages. For each one of them, they go through 4 stages, right? That's what they share in common. And they're very similar in that they all start with an understanding of emptiness, whether Hinayana or Mahayana practitioner. And then that understanding of emptiness is developed. Okay? So being developed means, so just briefly, I can't go into all the details, but just understanding this much in relation to the yogic direct perceiver. So if you are a Hinayana practitioner, in order to enter the Hinayana path of accumulation, you must generate the wish to overcome samsara, renunciation, right? And then the mind that realizes emptiness, that becomes important. And the criteria for moving on from then onwards is to do with the mind that realizes emptiness. So first you enter the path by way of having that wish. That's when you, for the first time, you actually enter the path. You get into the cable car. Okay? And then you realize emptiness the way I described it. First, you realize it with independence on inferential understanding. Then you deepen that. You take concentration, you bring concentration and the understanding of emptiness together, have a union of calm abiding and special insight. You strengthen that understanding, come to a direct perception, and then you start overcoming all the obstacles. You actually start to irreversibly overcome whatever obstruction there is that keeps you from reaching self-liberation. Okay? So on the path of accumulation you start, then path of preparation, path of seeing, and path of meditation. Those stages. Okay? The Bodhisattva does exactly the same, except in order to enter the Mahayana cable car, or the Mahayana path, they don't start off with just renunciation, the wish to be self-liberated, but with the wish to liberate all sentient beings. Then this is much more powerful in the sense that they do exactly what the Hinayana practitioner did, And then on the path of meditation, they reach the same level, but instead of getting out, instead of staying there, they shoot on, and having overcome the afflictive obstructions, they now start tackling the cognitive obstructions. They overcome those too until they reach enlightenment. So if you read this, I mean, again, unfortunately we don't have the time to read this in great detail, and it is probably beyond the scope of some of you if you're new to this. But it doesn't matter, at least you're introduced to it, and maybe more questions arise, and you develop the interest to get a better understanding. But the yogic direct perceiver is important for both, because they actually travel the same way. Except that, or with the exception that one is satisfied with reaching what is called the absence of ignorance and so forth, and the other one moves on. Does that make sense? So the importance of the yogic direct perceiver, if you read this, I will not be able to go through all those, but whichever page this is on your handout, but here it's like page 18. It starts with the 5 Hinayana path, then the 5 Mahayana path, just briefly explains them, and then I went through the different paths. Yes, until 21. So this is advanced, but I thought might as well incorporate the whole thing to give you some rough idea where it's actually going. Okay? And to answer that question, is it really lonely? Oh my God, it's beyond loneliness, it's beyond unhappiness. It's described to be the most blissful state possible. Because the only reason we are lonely is because we hold on to an I that is so separate from everyone else.
I didn't mean that. That's
not in that sense. Oh, I mean, you'll be the only one to do it. Okay, let me tell you this one. It's rare. It's rare. It's not easy. But look around. I mean, how many people are interested? I mean, not to say Buddhism is not the best religion. Of course, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama stresses all the time, different diseases need different medicines. So there's different religions, and not everyone feels drawn to Buddhism. However, Buddhism describes a method to reach this state. I don't know whether other religions do that too. I'm not too familiar with different religions. But how many people are interested in this? So it's just not a matter. It's just a matter of people not being interested. They're not interested. They're preoccupied with other things. So you're a minority. And then to take it to a very serious level and do it, that's hard. So it's definitely not many people who set out to do this. But it doesn't matter.
I think that in the Western world, because I don't know about this theory, because for me it's a theory, and probably for many people who have not experienced that, and they can understand that intellectually or even deeper than intellectually, but they still haven't reached of course, the top of the pyramid, or
no. This is something far. I mean, I'm sure it takes a lot of training, as you said. Okay, let me just interrupt you here, because otherwise it takes us too far off. Come back to it, please, during the discussion or during the question and answer. But just to say this much, it is true. It's one of the most difficult things, and realistically, I haven't even, as I said, I haven't even seen the cable car. I'm still packing.
And you are practicing how long?
How long? It's nothing. I mean, I've been a nun, maybe now 20 years, but 20 years is nothing.
It's more than I did.
You see, again, this is very interesting, because what she also mentioned, because we think so much in just this lifetime, right? We just think in this lifetime, we're so much, and it's natural. All I know, all I remember is, well, parts of this lifetime. But this is something that takes so very, very long.
About now, not only.
Yeah, we think about now very much. Yeah, it's very much this moment's happiness. But please, that's again when I said, think locally, the other way around. Act locally, it's a bit like, this is what is possible. Don't worry so much about it. But if you get a good understanding, all right, this is where the goal leads us to. Now, we may be at the very beginning, but that's fine to be a very beginner, right? Just to understand. Then, to set out, we have some idea where we're going to. And however long it takes, well, there's no deadline. So, and there's all the time in the world. Okay, but sorry, I just want to finish this. So if you can wait a little bit, unless it's a clarification.
If the Indian teachers
Yeah.
will agree with your description of the differences?
Well, they don't necessarily describe cable cars, but the description, the description is, well, yeah, the description is the same. So the Indian teachers means, well, now the Tibetan teachers. I mean, this is basically what I've been trained in that explanation. So that's based on that explanation. However, the examples are different. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, to get back to the mind. So, you have a sense of where it all leads to, how it is relevant, but we need to, of course, go back to the topic. Thus, this definitely completes the explanation of the mental consciousness, conceptual and non-conceptual. Okay, so non-conceptual, well, conceptual is clear. Non-conceptual, there's the dream consciousnesses plus the direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers, the cable car. Okay, all right. So, getting back to that, there's another category. Of course, there's more categories. There's many more, actually. And so another category is you can look at our awareness right now. Let's get back away from the mountain, back to our awareness right now. So our awareness can be either what's called a valid cognizer or a non-valid cognizer. Again, in a way, I've said it already. I mean, it's already been described, but we just look at it from a slightly different perspective again. So, minds that are valid cognizers, they realize or understand their object of engagement. We basically understand that because I've talked about this so much. But now something new comes in. My eye consciousness, when it perceives, for example, this table, it may actually understand, incontrovertibly know the table. But it doesn't have to, because it may be an awareness to which an object appears, but it's not ascertained. Do you remember? If someone tells me a really exciting story, and I happen to look at the table, my eye consciousness perceives the table, but it doesn't really know it. It doesn't incontrovertibly understands it. And later on I have no recollection. Okay. But then, when this mind realizes, let's say it doesn't realize its object, but from the Prasangika, the Madhyamika Prasangika point of view, every mind realizes something. Every mind, even a wrong consciousness, realizes something. So this is quite new. But this is actually, when you study the Madhyamika, this is one of their main views, their unique, uncommon views. That every time I perceive something, even if I perceive Barack Obama to be sitting on this table as a wrong consciousness, I realize I know something. I know the appearance of Barack Obama on this table. I know the appearance. It appears to me. Barack Obama, for whatever reason, I don't know how this could be, whatever hallucination that is, but the appearance I know. I know that Barack Obama appears to me. Does that make sense?
No. Magic.
No. Let's say, okay, the appearance. Let's say, okay, for example. Okay, let me just give you a different example. When I perceive the speckled rope to be a snake, okay, my object of engagement is the snake, which doesn't exist. The speckled rope being a snake. So that snake doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. However, the eye consciousness, so let's take the example of an eye consciousness. The eye consciousness is not aware, it doesn't know the snake because there's no snake to be known. It doesn't exist. But the eye consciousness knows the appearance of the snake. The snake appears. The appearance exists because it does appear. So the appearance of the snake exists and my eye consciousness is aware of that. That's why later on I remember that a snake appeared. I don't need a self-knower. I don't need. So in the lower schools they say, oh, the moment there's an eye consciousness, there's a mental consciousness that knows that there is an eye consciousness, which is why later on I remember I saw this or that. You see, how come we know we've seen something? That is the big question. I know there's this, there's a snake, I know there's a table. That is my sense consciousnesses. But how do I know? How do I know I am aware? What allows me to recollect having seen something later on? That's a big question. I know I'm aware. I mean, basically, the fact that we know that we have perceived certain things, it must come from somewhere. So from the Prasangika school point of view, our mind always is aware of the appearance.
But that is a concept.
Why does everyone insist on that? That is a concept. What do you mean exactly with saying that is a concept? Can you explain? Or can you wait? Okay, great. Yeah. Perfect. Anyway, it's funny. Every course there's something that people struggle with. This time it's the concept. Okay, never mind. So to get back to this. Therefore, a conceptual mind. A conceptual mind. So this is a direct perceiver, okay? Or a non-conceptual mind, a sense consciousness, whether correct or wrong. I'm always aware of the appearance. When it's correct, my eye consciousness that perceives the cup, not only do I perceive the cup, not only do I understand the cup, I know that it appears. I'm aware of the appearance. And later on when you say, did you see the cup? I know that I've seen the cup because I know that it appeared. But even if the consciousness is wrong, I'm aware of that wrong appearance. I may think it's right. I may say that was a real snake because it appeared. Okay, and then people say, no. You're right that it appeared, but you're wrong with thinking it was an actual snake. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that's direct, that's non-conceptual minds. Now, how about a conceptual mind? What does the conceptual mind realize? The generic image. It realizes the appearance of the generic image. That's why I could ask you previously, how does the chocolate appear? Is there an image of the chocolate? Yes, because your conceptual mind understood chocolate. Understood the generic image. You were aware of the appearance of the generic image. The lower schools don't accept that. But that doesn't make sense because the lower schools have no way of explaining how I know that when I think of my mom, she appeared in a certain way. That was the representation. The representation of my mother is the generic image. The representation of the car that I don't possess, but that you do. So if you have a car and you think about the car that is not presently here, it appears, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Right now, think of the car. You can do lots of things at the same time. Listen to me and think of the car. Right? So if you think of the car, it appears. Your conceptual mind is aware. It understands the appearance of the car. Does that make sense? That's why you remember that previously you thought about a car. Because you have that part. Even if it's a wrong consciousness. Even if conceptually you think, ooh, there was a snake in the room. Right? That was a snake. I was like, let's say you walk out of this room and you go, whoa, this room is really weird. There was the snake. It, there was this coiled rope lying there. And in our mind, we're like, oh my God, I hope it doesn't come closer. Oh, fortunately, it sleeps. It's not moving. All right, I'm safe. So that was the conceptual mind, wrongly perceiving a snake. That conceptual mind was mistaken with regard to thinking there was a snake. However, it was aware. It did know that a snake appeared. It was aware of the generic image of a snake.
It did see a snake.
Yes, it did see a snake, which wasn't a snake, but it also saw that a snake appeared. It also understood that the snake appeared, and the appearance of the snake was there. Right? The appearance of the snake did not come from an actual snake, it was just coming from that misperception, but the appearance was still there. That's why we later on understand we've seen something, we perceive something. Okay, just a sec. I'm almost done with today's lecture. I counted the pages, I know how many pages I have to finish to be able to finish.
You have tomorrow.
Well, yeah, tomorrow, but there's only two classes tomorrow. And tomorrow the most important parts come. The most important comes actually tomorrow. So I need to finish. Okay. All right. So does that make sense so far? Does that make sense? I'll have question and answers in a moment. But this I want to make sure that valid cognizer, and this cannot be the last time you hear about it. If you're really interested in knowing about the mind, there's certain books you can read. There's teachings you can probably download online. Just need to Google it. Audio teachings on the mind, you find so much. There's books here. Mind in Tibetan Buddhism. Mind you, it's very difficult. Yeah, and then in a store. I can recommend you Buddhist Psychology by Geshe Tashi Tsering. It's a very more accessible book. I mean, Mind in Tibetan Buddhism is also very beautiful, but it's very difficult. It's very terse and difficult to read. Whereas Mind in Tibetan Buddhism is more accessible. Buddhist Psychology by Geshe Tashi Tsering is more accessible. It's a little easier to understand. And a lot of the things, Buddhist Psychology by Geshe Tashi Tsering, it's a lot of Geshe Tashi Tsering. Anyway, we can maybe put it on the website or something, like a recommended reading for those of you who want to keep up with this. I mean, we studied this over and over and over again. We studied this for 3 months or 4 month fast. And then throughout this time, it came up again and again. So to get something equal to that, you need to again and again go over it. Listen to it again, hear it again, read about it, and then you get a clear understanding. Right? So I don't expect you to go out and go, all right, I'll teach on the mind now. I mean, it's hard in this short period of time. But if you get some sense, you've understood something, well, you know, my purpose has been served. All right, so valid cognizer, the mind that realizes its object of engagement. So just to realize something, well, that would make every mind a valid cognizer. But here we say most specifically the object of engagement. So the eye consciousness that apprehends the snake. This is why we've put it that way. We don't just say eye consciousness. In Tibetan it's the same way. The eye consciousness that apprehends the snake. In Tibetan it goes the other way around. You say snake apprehending eye consciousness. But other than that, it expresses the same thing. So the snake apprehending eye consciousness. What is its main object of engagement? The snake. Very easy. So, snake apprehending eye consciousness. If there is no snake, but there's a rope, it's not a valid cognizer because its object of engagement cannot be known because it doesn't exist. So that's not a valid cognizer. Okay. So the difference between those two, a valid cognizer and a not valid cognizer. And then, again, you can divide it. You can divide it into direct valid cognizer and inferential valid cognizer. So direct valid cognizers we've described, right? Yogic direct perceivers, sense consciousnesses, right? They're all, sense consciousnesses that are direct, that realize their objects. So the eye consciousness that realizes this pen is a valid cognizer that realizes the pen. It's like the object of engagement is the pen. It realizes it. So it's a valid cognizer because it realizes its object of engagement. Okay? That's clear, isn't it? Okay. Then you have yogic direct perceivers that maybe realize the lack of inherent existence of this pen. They're also valid cognizers. And then you have inferential cognizers. So I've mentioned those before. Inferential cognizers. So in the process of realizing emptiness, and unfortunately, this was my challenge. I mentioned inferential cognizer, but I never really got to explain them because it wasn't the time to explain them. But no matter how I moved it around, I always had that challenge. I would have to mention a mind without being able to really explain it, and then get to it a little later. Because they're all connected, so whichever mind I start with, I have to kind of neglect an explanation. But anyway, at this point, this is the time in the context of explaining the valid cognizers, an inferential cognizer is explained. What is an inferential cognizer? Do you have any inferential cognizers right now? As ordinary people, I'm not sure you're ordinary, but let's assume you're not meditating on emptiness, I don't know how many hours a day, and you haven't realized it yet. So therefore, do you have any inferential cognizers? Do you have any minds? Do you realize objects which are maybe temporarily hidden? Not necessarily hidden in the sense I've explained, but just due to the circumstances, we cannot directly know something and therefore rely on reason to infer that something is so-and-so. Any examples? Think of smoke and fire.
Rita's left.
Pardon?
Rita's left part of the left part of Rita's back.
Yes. What about that?
I can't see it.
So you can infer that the right part is also there, because she's still moving, so she's totally complete. Therefore, you can infer that Rita is sitting there.
I think that anything beyond this room is...
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. If suddenly smoke billows in, right? Wood fire smoke, we can infer, well, there's a fire. Classic example. So that's the most classic example. It's said to be on a mountain, right? Okay, Tibet makes it obvious that there's a lot of examples about mountains, but we can use the neighbor's house. I cannot see, if I'm not inside the neighbor's house, to me the neighbor's house is temporarily hidden. It's not a hidden phenomenon in general, because I could just go over and break in the door and could see the fire. But there's also objects which are generally manifest, but for me right now they're hidden because of the place I'm in. So I have to use inference. I have to use inference to infer that there's a fire in my neighbor's house because smoke comes billowing out. And you know the kind of smoke. Now, I don't want to get into the argument, oh, it could be any kind of smoke. It could be vapor. It's not vapor. It's wood fire smoke. Okay? So on the basis of that, I can incontrovertibly come to an understanding that there's smoke, that there's fire inside, without having to break in the door. Right? And we take that all the time. We do it all the time. We use inference. You know, someone is sad or not. I cannot see their sadness. I can infer from their face there's something wrong with them. That's hidden to us. That's hidden. I'm not saying we're always right? They may just be eating a bitter piece of something and they look very sad, but actually they're not. No, I'm not always saying we're right, but we use inference all the time. There's a lot of just manifest objects that are, I'm not saying the person's state of mind, that is always hidden. But there's certain objects that are actually manifest, easy to understand, but due to the circumstances we have to infer. Can this wait or? Okay. So, can it wait? No.
Would you then use inference mind to the time where you say that your body appears to my eyes because I see only part of your body?
If then the question arose, is part of our body missing? Right? Your eye consciousness perceives the body. That's what, as a convention, is asserted. But if then the doubt arose, oh, is there only a half? Has she been slashed into two? And what I see is just, sorry, but see what I'm saying? So is there still? Then you can infer on the basis of me moving able without being in pain and so forth. You can infer, no, complete organ's still there. Can't perceive them, but still there. Okay? But this is really, you're going into, just as a convention we say, you see me. Right? And only if you have doubt, because I only see a part, is this something spooky going on? Then you can infer, no, it isn't. Right? Okay.
Can I just say with the inference, this is part of the meditation we did this morning, to see how, you hear sound, immediately you have a generic image, and boom, there's something, your mind puts an inference on something without questioning, is it really like that or not? And then you go in that direction as if everything is a correct inferential cognizer.
Oh, yes, what Venerable Rita is bringing up is very interesting because first of all, we do this all the time. We're so trained. Oh, we hear a dog. All right, dog is nearby. That is probably a correct inferential cognizer, but they can also be incorrect ones. They're not actually inferential cognizers because we take an incorrect reason to establish something which cannot actually establish. So that we do too.
Yeah, this is
all the time. But our mind, we do all the time. Sometimes we're correct, sometimes we're incorrect.
I think this is why you have to maybe stress, depending on the correct sign.
Yes, very, very true. Venerable Rita is bringing up, I should stress that it needs to depend on a correct reason, because unfortunately, oftentimes we use incorrect reasons. So it has to be a correct reason. If I try to prove that there's fire in my neighbor's house because the sky is blue, that's not a correct reason. This is a bizarre reason. Or because my neighbor is shouting. That is not a correct reason to infer that my neighbor, that there's a fire in the house. So there's certain reasons that can establish the existence of fire in the house, and others can't. And sometimes we may have a correct reason. Well, sometimes we may have a correct reason and come to a correct understanding, but sometimes we may have an incorrect reason and not come to an understanding. We think we have an inferential mind, but we don't. Okay? So our mind, all the time, our mind is such, it always uses reasons. As I said previously, our emotional states, they all arise independent on reasons. I don't like this person because. I'm attached to them because. I'm a little bit better than everyone else because. We always have reasons, but that doesn't mean they're correct reasons. These are all incorrect reasons that lead us to incorrect conclusions. But we also have we come to correct conclusions about things. Some scientists use inference all the time. If you can't perceive an atom directly, you now need to infer it. Now, of course, the problem is, if so far we thought the inferential cognizer that perceives that the speed of light is the fastest, that light is the fastest moving object, well, now maybe we come to see it wasn't an inferential cognizer. It was an incorrect consciousness because...
That's science, all the time it's contradictory.
Yes, but the problem is we don't know because it's either the fastest or it's not. But whether we understand it or not, that's a different matter. So we may think we have a correct understanding, but we don't. It doesn't do anything about the facts. Right?
You can't have an invalid inferential cognizer?
Well, it would not be called inferential cognizer in the first place, but actually, yes, you could have a mind that incorrectly assumes something independent on an incorrect reason. We can have that, we have it a lot.
Yeah, most of the time.
Most of the time, I guess, well, yeah, most of the time, a lot of the time, yeah. I agree, yes, most of the time we do. And we also have some correct ones, of course. But the point is, it's important to understand, here we're aiming for correct ones. So the understanding of emptiness, for the first time, we can only understand it independent on correct reasons. All right? Okay. So this explains, with this we conclude the valid cognizers, which are inferential valid cognizers. So, tick about that one. Unfortunately, I need to raise a little bit, because otherwise I won't be able to give you the entire explanation of this. But I want to open it up for questions. If there are no questions, which I don't expect that's the case, because the hand go up the moment I say it. But I could continue a little bit further on. But otherwise, let's take the remaining time. That's the remaining 20 minutes for question answers, and I'll continue tomorrow. Okay. Yeah. All right. You were the fastest, yes. Could you pass on the microphone?
Somebody that don't know about the existence of snakes, you would not see a rope like a snake, no?
Someone who doesn't know about snakes would not perceive snakes.
No.
No. Do you know the story about Christopher Columbus when he arrived? Yeah, you know the story, okay. What did you say?
So, if you perceive a rope like a snake, it's a conceptual mind.
Okay, this is again the question, all right. If you have not learned about snakes and about ropes, well, especially about snakes, if you have no idea about snakes, your eye consciousness could not perceive snake, or at least being a snake. I mean, it would just perceive something that is in reality snake, but it would not be aware there is a snake. So first, there's a conceptual labeling, and then that labeling influences the eye consciousness, so therefore we can then see, even with the eye consciousness, there's a snake or not. I mean, we can perceive that, but we must have a concept of snake, yes.
So it's the conceptual, it's not only the appearance of snake. You need the concept.
Yes, for it to become the object of engagement, to really perceive, oh, this is so-and-so. We need to have a concept, yes. It is a snake. I mean, if I have no concept of a snake, for example, if there's someone called, I don't know, Bob, for example. So Bob, I can perceive this person, but I don't necessarily know whether it's Bob. I must have a concept of Bob. If I then know, oh, this person, Bob, then I can actually say, oh, there's Bob. Does that make sense?
You don't need a concept, you need a signification, a language.
But that's, in this context, the same, yeah. A concept means you have an idea.
If someone lands here from
It's actually still her.
It's my turn.
It's still her turn. She's right.
Yes.
We can discuss, let's discuss this during the discussion group. This is like a debate that you could bring up in the discussion group. And if it's not answered, I'll do it when it's your turn.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the appearance
Mm-hmm.
is not only a sense. In that case, it's a concept.
It's dependent on okay, let's specify this a little bit. It's dependent on having generated a concept before. Does that make sense? It's dependent on a conceptual consciousness. It does not mean the I consciousness is a concept, but it depends on having generated a concept previously. Yes, this
And
right.
another thing, instead of saying lack of inherent existence, can you say in the positive way interdependence?
Okay. Interdependence.
Yes.
So her question is, instead of saying lack of inherent existence, could you just call it interdependence? No.
Why?
Because they're not exactly the same thing. I mean, if something is interdependent, it must lack inherent existence, and if something lacks inherent existence, it must be interdependent.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that it appears to the mind in exactly the same way. Okay?
But that is the concept. A3
Mm-hmm.
is dependent, is lack of inherent existence
Mm-hmm.
because it's dependent
Yes.
dependent on the sun and
Yeah. But when your mind perceives one, it doesn't have to perceive the other. Okay? So, what I'm saying here is, actually they're synonymous. Whatever is interdependent must lack inherent existence. Whatever lacks inherent existence must be interdependent. But to say they're exactly the same means when you perceive one, you must perceive the other. If something is exactly the same, when you're aware of one, you must be aware of the other. But that is not necessarily the case.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good. Okay, can I maybe, because I have this line here anyway, I'll just read it, sorry. I'll just read this. So, for there to be a cup, an I consciousness has to create it. Okay, this is where I think the mistake lies. 3 conditions are needed for it to do so: a previous moment of consciousness, a functioning I brain or I sense power, and a cup. Help. So, I guess it's like the mind, this is explained correctly. So for an I consciousness to perceive the cup, you need the part of the brain and the I and so forth for it to arise in the previous moment of consciousness. But that doesn't mean that the I then just makes it up. I mean, you need a cup. Right? I said you need a cup. The cup is here. My mind is here. So you still need a cup. So you don't create it. But the only reason I perceive a cup, or the only reason there is a cup, is because of mind to perceive it. Right? They're interdependent. The cup is dependent on the mind is dependent on the cup. So they're interdependent. Therefore, I'm not creating a cup as such, but the cup doesn't exist independent of a mind perceiving it. Does that make sense?
Are there objects that can exist independent of the mind?
Are there objects that can exist independent of mind? No.
Not man-made, for example.
Even not man-made.
But
Without a
that's
mind to
matter of
perceive them?
belief.
Well,
For
that's
example,
a matter...
something somewhere in the galaxy that we are unaware of.
Okay.
Scientifically, it can be...
Okay, this is too difficult. This question takes too many discussions, and unfortunately, I cannot go into all its details, but it is said that you need a mind to perceive it, but you don't need a mind right now to perceive it. If later on you perceive it, that's still okay.
But that transcends the...
All right. Sorry, I need to stop you here because so many other questions. But it's good you have these questions in the first place. But there's, of course, the discussion group where you could hopefully clarify this. Yes?
I don't know why, but this understanding that I see a snake, even there is no snake, brought up to me like a compassion. I don't know why.
Compassion for the snake, or?
No. I think I understood compassion, because if I see something and there is no, and it it doesn't exist.
Right.
So if I think somebody did something,
Mm-hmm.
he did it because it exists to him.
Very good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. That's exactly where compassion comes from.
Yeah, it just popped up.
Good. That was a great popping up. No, it's very helpful because from a Buddhist perspective, compassion makes sense. It makes sense because we understand where people are coming from. When someone does something, I mean, we know from our own experience, we do certain things, we make mistakes, not because we think they're mistakes, not because we think, oh, we're totally wrong and I'm really going to get myself to really suffer. We think we get something out of it. We're mistaken in some way or another, and then we make mistakes, right? So it's really not that we are inherently, intrinsically horrible people. No, we just don't see the world for what it is. We don't understand phenomena exactly the way they exist, so we make mistakes. So it's forgivable in that sense, because it's not, I mean, again, if you look at each and every person, I'm not saying we think we know it's wrong, but there's still some other mind that sets in and goes, yeah, but we should still do it because it gives me some happiness. That is also a wrong consciousness. So other people understanding that, it helps us to get compassion that is not stupid kind of compassion, but compassion that is constructive, right? We have wrong views all the time. People having wrong views, having a distorted view of reality, that's why they do the things they do. And how sad, because eventually they harm themselves a lot more than they do others, right? And that's why we can, feel compassion. It's a very important point. Okay. Yes, can you pass on the microphone?
My question is about the cognitive obstructions.
Yes.
I understand that the obstructions to self-liberation are the afflictive emotions, and that by directly realizing their empty nature, we can overcome them. So, am I correct in assuming that the cognitive obstructions are the way in which those negative emotions influence the way we cognize objects? Are they the component that we project into the object?
No.
Which is no.
No. I haven't really explained it because it is really difficult to understand, and again, not the scope of this class, but okay, so basically we say that we have ignorance, a misperception, the reason for being compassionate, this misperception of reality on its deepest level. That is the root of all other misperceptions, plus the root of anger, attachment, and so forth. That is called the afflictive obstructions. These are the afflictive obstructions. And these minds, because they have arisen in our continuum for so long, every time they arise, they leave some residue. It's called an imprint. They leave an imprint. It's like not only do they arise, but when they're there, they leave something, some impression on our mind. And that impression, even when the mind is gone, impression is still there. So let's say you overcome your anger, really like you've taken that one cable car, you've reached the state of self-liberation. There's no ignorance, no anger, no attachment, they're all gone. But these impressions, those residues, they're still there. The imprints, they're still there. They're harder to get rid of. Usually the example you may have heard of is the example of garlic. If you have garlic in a container, the garlic in the container, if it was there for a long time, it leaves a residue on the container. Let's say a wooden kind of container. Our mind is like this wooden container. The garlic being there for so long, since beginning this time basically, that the ignorance was there and has left that smell. It's relatively easy to remove the garlic, which would be like removing the afflictive obscurations. But that is not enough to have a clean vessel, because you now have the smell left. You have to get rid of the smell. The smell is like the cognitive obscurations. So there's still, the wood is still not in its purest state, just as our mind is still not in its purest state, even though we cannot have anger, attachment, any of those afflictive emotions or afflictive obscurations arise again. We've irreversibly overcome them. We still have that residue left, and that is called the cognitive obscurations. And only first you need to remove the garlic, and then you can remove those residues. Does that make sense? And these imprints, because they obscure, just as they obscure the pure nature of the wood, they obscure the pure nature of our mind and obscure it from seeing all phenomena, from being omniscient. Kol Yodeh, you know? I remember that from last year. Kol Yodeh. Not Kol Yadol or Yakol. Kol Yachol. Not Kol Yachol. Not omnipotent, but Kol Yodeh. Yodeh. Okay.
So they reside as part of the conceptual mind, which they reside in the conceptual mind, or they reside in the non-conceptual mind?
Okay. Don't think so much of conceptual mind or non-conceptual mind. Think mental consciousness. The mental consciousness is always there. The sense consciousness, sometimes yes, sometimes no. The mental consciousness is always there. Sometimes that mental consciousness is conceptual, sometimes it's non-conceptual. Whatever it is, but the mental consciousness, that's where the imprints are. That's where the residue is. So, conceptual or non-conceptual, just on that continue, these imprints are. And they keep the mind from perceiving all phenomena. They restrict it. Does that make sense? So the sense consciousnesses don't hold any imprints. They're not set to hold imprints. It's really the mental consciousness. Yeah. Yes, okay. All right.
I'm still a little bit struggling with the valid cognition when the rope appears as a snake.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Even if the rope is not there,
yes,
and you...
Oh, if the rope is not there, you don't perceive a rope to be a snake. No, I mean, you perceive an empty space to be a snake. I mean, you have some, if I suddenly saw a snake, I saw within this space, I perceive a snake. I mean, just for the sake of clarity, usually there's something similar to a snake, which then, but sometimes people just have hallucinations. Right? Then you don't perceive this or that. It's just non-existence of sound is perceived. I mean, the absence of sound, there's perceived to be sound. So we don't even have to say that. It's just for the sake of clarity. So if I hallucinate, I just perceive sound where there isn't any.
So it's not valid? Or is it valid?
That's non-valid. If I perceive someone kind of saying something, it's not there. I just imagine that. I have this hallucination. So then that ear consciousness that perceives the sound is a non-valid ear consciousness because its object of engagement doesn't exist. It's a wrong consciousness.
You don't have an outside condition.
And you don't have an outside condition. Well, the thing is, you don't need, for a wrong consciousness, you don't need an outside condition. For a sense consciousness that is like a correct consciousness, then you need an outside condition. But I mean, I guess you still need some sound. I mean, you always have some sound, right? So, I mean, you don't need necessarily like the sound of a tape recorder, for example, that then gets you to think, oh, there's an actual person. But I guess just still sound, I guess, yeah, you could say that there's still, I mean, there's always still sound, right? The ear consciousness is always there because there's always some sound. Does that make sense? Not that we may pick up on it. But for this wrong consciousness here now, so just the fact that a consciousness arises is because there's sound. If there's no sound, I mean, even the sound of silence. I mean, the sound of that's still, it's still some sensation, because that's when we know there's a sound. So therefore, but for the wrong consciousness to arise, you don't need actually some sound of a person there.
Sense consciousness.
Pardon?
Wrong sense consciousness.
A wrong sense consciousness, such as an ear consciousness that perceives sound of a voice which is not there. It's a wrong sense consciousness. Like, for example, sense consciousnesses can be wrong or correct. So a correct consciousness is perceiving a rope. Let's say there's a rope. It perceives a rope because there is a rope. That's a correct consciousness. The consciousness that perceives the rope to be a snake is an incorrect or wrong sense consciousness. But both have, actually the correct consciousness really needs something out there for it to be. An incorrect one doesn't need something to be out there because it's incorrect. It doesn't exist. Its object doesn't exist. The observed object condition doesn't exist, so it doesn't need an observed object condition.
But if I imagine it, wouldn't it be mental? Would it
that's
still
it.
be
Can it arise?
sense?
Wrong consciousness.
Would it be still sense wrong, but sense consciousness? If it's not there at all and it's my imagination.
It's not really in
I think that I hear, but I feel it.
Okay, let's think of someone taking drugs, right? Because of drugs.
It's inside the mind because...
But the mind is the eye consciousness is the mind. It's a mind. We're not talking about the eye here. We're talking about a mind, an eye consciousness that therefore has the appearance of, even there's nothing there, an appearance of a snake or a hallucination.
A form.
A form, exactly, yeah.
Or an ear consciousness as a sound.
Has a sound which actually is not there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Because that's their object.
Pardon?
It's not the object of the mental consciousness.
inside the mind.
Yes, like the cataracts, the floaters, you remember? Right? Cause of error existing in the basis. The cause is here, some internal damage, drugs or whatever. Sometimes it has to do with something being similar out there, or the situation, the lights and so forth. Sometimes it's totally internal. Depends on the situation. Yeah.
So it picks up from where, on which mind, on which concept, if it's wrong.
Concept. Sorry, can you say again? What do you mean with concept?
So it picks.
Yeah.
You can take it further a bit. So this wrong
Eye consciousness.
high consciousness comes from where?
Comes from where? Well, it's the eye consciousness is always there. But because now the circumstances, for example, you're under drugs. We've taken, I don't know, LSD, exactly. Right? Or we have a sickness. We have a mental problem. There's some brain damage, for example. And this brain damage is then responsible for conjuring up the image of, I don't know, someone walking around in the room, or someone who's not there, but we still, have an appearance of a form, as Rita was saying.
Where?
Fever, heat, yeah.
So this form was picked up from where? From which kind of consciousness?
The eye consciousness. In this case, it's the eye consciousness. Let's take the example of an eye consciousness. I've been heavily drugged, and I see a butterfly, purple one, right there, right? Where does it come from? It's my brain firing neurons in a really weird way. So it's the eye sense power, which includes the brain. So some neurons are fired in the brain, right, which usually would be fired if there was actually a butterfly. But without having that butterfly, without having that reflection on my retina, and then the neurons in my brain firing, they just fire randomly. Does that make sense? And so a purple butterfly appears.
Can we talk about a subtle form?
It's not a subtle form, it's non-existent. Right? It's not a subtle form because it doesn't exist in the first place. I mean, I'm not even saying there's a subtle purple butterfly. There's nothing.
Is it a generic image of a butterfly that comes out?
No. Then in the next moment, my mental consciousness goes, butterfly, oh, look how pretty, da, 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 da. It starts thinking about it, reflecting upon it. That's when I have a generic image with a conceptual mind. But previously it was just an eye consciousness nakedly having the appearance of a butterfly, which came because of an internal error. Does that make sense?
Or imagination.
Imagination implies a conceptual mind. Oh, butterfly, maybe there's butterflies. I close my eyes, I don't even look in space. And that would be a conceptual mind. Unfortunately, I really last question, all right, yeah. So let's make it the last question because I don't want to be so much over time.
Does the sense consciousness has labels or have labels?
Very good question, it doesn't. The sense consciousness doesn't label. The sense consciousness, no, it's the mental consciousness.
So when you say, so in all our discussion, like a butterfly, so
Yes.
So exactly how do you, so you recognize, but it's without the label.
But this is what I answered before. I think I explained it twice. Which is when, for the first time, let's say you're a newborn baby. If there, let's say there was a butterfly, your eye consciousness would just perceive a shape and color that happens to be the shape and color of a butterfly. But the eye consciousness would not see a butterfly, it would not recognize a butterfly. Then, because of seeing it again and again, your parents kind of explain you this is a butterfly, you conceptually, you label, you get a concept of butterfly, and that conceptual mind influences now the eye consciousness so that now you can actually, with your eye consciousness, see a butterfly. You can recognize it. You can go into a room with your eye consciousness, see butterfly, see picture, see whiteboard, see altar, without having to think. Because over time, we've developed those concepts. This is why a blind person who's never seen those, they have concepts of butterflies, but the ones that comes through touch, through hearing. They can have a concept of the objects in this room because they may, I've seen a documentary about this guy who does a clicking sound all the time. Right? You've seen that one? It's very interesting. So he can hear the echo of things. So he knows there's an object here. He knows that. So he has a concept of that through the clicking sound, through the ear consciousness, and then the making a concept, having developed a concept, now every time he walks into a room, he can perceive a table. Right? I mean, it's not really the form and shape of a table, but it's just the echo that comes back. But, pardon?
Bats do that.
Bats, exactly, like a bat would do. So, likewise, but this exact same person, if they were to walk into a room, they could suddenly see, they would not see what we see. Because the labeling has not had an influence on the eye consciousness yet. That's why Christopher Columbus, when he arrived in America, I think when he arrived in America, it is said that the local Indians, they didn't perceive the ship because they had no concept of it. They didn't perceive it, right? They didn't see the boats arriving because there was no concept. If there was an inherently existent boat, everyone must perceive it. But you need to mind to label it to be actually able to see it. Okay. One more? No. Sorry. It's 5 minutes past 6, so we have the meditation. All right, so we'll continue on tomorrow. I hope I can finish, but tomorrow is one of the most important ones. So tomorrow morning and afternoon. So I know many of you want to leave before the traffic jams, but as Venerable Rita is so informed about what happens, she knows that the traffic jam is much better in the afternoon. I mean, it's like you get stuck in the traffic jam if you leave before, but if you go afterwards, there's no traffic jam in the first place. So anyway, since I would like to finish this, please bear with me. Okay, all right.
Page 18. בזכות חסד זה לא השיג במהרה את מצב הגור ובודה, ולהוביל אל מצב זה את כל הנוגעים עד אחד. בתודעת ההערה העילאית תקרת הערך שטרם נולדה תיוולד, וזו שנולדה לא תתנוון ותגבר או תבוא. בארץ זו המוקפת רכסי הרים מושלגים, מקור הרווחה והאושר ללא יוצא מן הכלל, אבל עוד תשבר הרע ועוצמה תנזין גיאצו, ותוותר עד קץ הקיום.
Okay, so we meet again 20 past 6. We can have 15 minutes break. That's what it says here. And please be mindful of the silence.
Oh, the silence. Yes.
Silence means not talking, okay? Not just not talking when we are not looking. Not talking.